Thank you. The first two words to say are thank you for the opportunity to be here in such a beautiful place with such wonderful and interesting people. A special thank you to Paige, who was responsible for bringing me here today. She's not responsible for anything I have to say. There's a lot of information that we've heard this morning, and I want to move through things quickly, because I've got a lot of ground to cover. The second thing I should say is I am not an acoustician, and to be in a position here looking at people who clearly know more about the subject than I do is a bit of a challenge. But one I was told to take on, because actually there is something different that we could do with the information, or something positively different with the information that we have here, which is beginning to leverage it and beginning to use it commercially, which is what the project that I was involved with, which Franz had mentioned earlier, was all about last year. 3 words, because I think there's a lot of information that you'll have today, and there's no way you can possibly process all of it. But what I try and do, when people say, what do you try and do in your work, try and do change the dialogue around sustainability with 3 new words. More, now, and most importantly, personal. Because when we think about sustainability, that's not the language that we normally have. Normally we think about doing less for some future gain for somebody else. And where I'm from, in Boston, you don't challenge these people. But on this one, I disagree. Because actually, when we're talking about health and well-being, or we're talking about indoor environmental quality more generally, or we're talking about acoustics specifically, we are talking something which is very personal to people, which in fact is intensely related to the performance of the business. And we know this, because you've no doubt seen slides like this. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, the information is always presented like this, and it tends to always look the same. And whenever I see a slide like this, I see climate change. Because the presentation, the framing of the issue is still the same. A very big problem, a very big public problem, which almost looks too big to solve on your own. And so when we ask companies to engage with health and well-being, the answer is typically, I know it's a big problem, but what can I do? And for a long time, despite lots of evidence and lots of very good work, some of which we heard about here today, in sustainability, we haven't taken that you part, that personal part of it, as fundamental as we might have. And so we have failed to answer the most personal question of all, which is really what indoor environmental quality is all about, which is, what's in it for me? And if you rephrase the question that way, it presents some interesting possibilities to begin to work with organizations who know this is a problem, but who haven't had the business case made to them in a particularly relevant way, in a way that they can start to grasp. And so when we started the report at the beginning of 2014 for the World Green Building Council, which I was heavily involved with and very grateful for the opportunity, we started with a fundamental question, and it wasn't this one. It wasn't, how does the environment affect people in buildings? The question was, how does my building affect my people? Because we know that there's a lot of evidence about the effect of place on people. We've had that for decades, and we've been surprised by how little uptake there has been when you think about the potential business case that can be made. In organizations, the 2 biggest expenses are people and place. And very seldom have organizations done what we ask them to do, which is to think about the relationship between those 2 from a purely economic point of view. And while we're talking about business, we thought we had to, again in the words of the Godfather, make them an offer they can't refuse, okay? Which is to find a low-cost, high-value proposition to present to companies. Because we know if we want to take them on, they want to take this agenda on, they need to be able to understand it almost from the go, and they need to be able to see results straight away. And because once you get that, you get the hook, and they'll go deeper, and they'll go deeper. So typically, I think if we're being honest about sustainability, we've always been in the high cost and potentially low value proposition when we talk about its relationship specifically to countries. If we're being honest with ourselves, it's been difficult to make a business case around things like energy efficiency because it's such a small proportion of a company's spend. So what we're asking to do when we sat down and we put together a model, which again tried to be very simplistic, was to think about the three things which most people in their ordinary life knew what was to be true. What we know being in this environment is true, that if you put people in the environment, it has an effect on them. It makes them behave in different ways. And yet we also know from the literature that people who've tried to make a direct correlation between the physical environment and the financial aspects of a business have not been able to make that case. And we heard about this morning. We know that there is an intervening factor between the physical environment that you provide and the ultimate performance of people. And that is how people perceive the environment, the perceptual. So three things to think about. I like to think of them in terms of environment, experience, and economics. And the argument goes something like this. You provide the environment which enhances the experience, which enhances the economics. And although we're going to be talking about offices here today, that also applies to other sectors, particularly retail. We're looking at this closely now with the help of Saint-Gobain, who are part of a wider campaign around this. But that's enough for now. What's the hitch? What's the catch? To begin to use data that organizations already have within their power. So even though we started with 44 separate measures of productivity, we settled on 6. And you can see them there. Absenteeism, you've heard about some of them this morning with regard to what Sarah had to say about hospitals. Because if you're not collecting those data, you're not collecting sustainability data, you're not collecting business data that you should be collecting already. So the argument is you shouldn't go collect more, you should have these things already. And if you don't have them, by the way, you can go and get them quite easily. It's also geared to be such that this is a personal framework. So the people who are going to have the data are not only the companies themselves, but it will be people within the company who you can then bring together to look at this. So if you bring your HR people into the room, they'll understand the people aspect of this. If you bring your FM, they'll understand the performance of the building. A CFO will obviously know about the economics of the company. In more than a year and a half of going into companies and saying, have you ever done this? The answer has been no. The amount of cooperation there is around the two expenses is quite small. Even though the companies may have data in all of those 6 relatively straightforward categories, they've never done it, in my experience, on a place-by-place basis. And yet we invest in sustainability, and we look at what the effect of a business is, but we never connect the two. As we were writing the report, people will say, well, how do I measure the environment? How do I measure the experience? And how do I measure the economics? I'm just going to take you through it very quickly. And then I'm going to tell you the more important bit, which is why you should be doing this. As we were writing it, it became clear to us that there were a variety of over-the-counter products coming into the market, Cube Sensor, Alima, and the Tapmo. There was a bit of a revolution in 2014 about the number of products that people could begin to put in their homes. Basically, we had a revolution in environmental trackers in the same way that we had around physical trackers. So these are available to people, and you can actually begin to put them in environments now. We're doing that all over places like London and New York. And they will tell you very clearly, in real time, data about temperature, pressure, humidity, VOCs, light, and the last one, most importantly for you, noise. Now, these are not commercial monitors, and they have their flaws. But their low price and their ability to deploy them easily and understand the data quickly makes them highly relevant. It used to be difficult. It used to be very expensive to do post-occupancy evaluations. You can now use Google Apps within your company to roll out a post-occupancy survey for a matter of £100, £200. It's very easy to begin to ask a series of questions about how people experience the environment and begin to tie that back both to the physical environment that's provided and also the economics of the business. I won't spend too much time on this because you can't see it in the back, I'm sure. But it's just basically taking an organization's data from 3 years back and making some correlations, both to the numbers within a business, but also some national statistics. And you can see very, very quickly, just by looking at absences, if you have a problem that needs further investigating in your business. Why should you do this? More interesting question. Wellness as a trend is huge and getting larger. And there are lots of people who are good at realizing the opportunity behind this and making some money out of it. As we were writing the report, we were just about here in 2014. And that explosion that you see in physical trackers and environments that enable people to understand how the environment is impacting them has only got larger. One of my favorites is this one, because I used to do air quality about 10 years ago in the States, and it ran like this. Very expensive equipment, needing experts to understand the data old before you could interpret it, not particularly relevant to most people who were looking at it. Very, very expensive proposition. What's behind me on the screen here is data collected primarily by cyclists going to and from work and uploading real-time, granular, street-by-street air quality about conditions in London. And this is not just London. Every major city in the world has something which looks like this. So the ability for ordinary individuals to understand how the environment is impacting them, not only for themselves, but to then upload it, has significant commercial ramifications for the commercial real estate industry. And it's also about social media. A very, very influential article in the New Yorker came out about the time that we were writing the report, which said that essentially the idea that you will be taking a product that you know nothing about is gone, for the same reasons that we've been talking about. The ability for ordinary individuals to understand the impact of their environment, transmit that information where everybody can see it, opens up new possibilities. And yet still, the real estate industry doesn't quite grasp the opportunity that is here, or the risk. That's the monitor I was talking about before. You can get 6 of them for about £400. Okay, and I can tell you that they're being gobbled up by companies in places like London and elsewhere, put into effect. Why? So they can better understand the environment, so they can make some management changes, so they can change the development of their strategy, so that they can argue that they've got a poor environment at a rent review, so that they can look at a building before they buy it as part of due diligence. All with the basic commercial monitor, which has skipped the commercial market and aimed itself at the residential market. So people get this. This is a Muse headset. It measures brainwaves. It's available on Amazon.com for £200. So when people say, how can you measure well-being objectively? Well, that doesn't do it, but it gets us a long way there. Each one of those dots on the map represents a monitor that I showed you earlier. That allows the ordinary individual, the ordinary company, to be able to understand in new ways how the environment is impacting them. With a flip of a switch, you can make all of that information public. So we're getting to the point now where if you're interested in what's happening in a property, you can dial down, you can look right in on a street-by-street basis and have access to data, which is highly influential to the performance of occupants who take that space, available for the very first time. And it's not just the physical environment. The perceptual element that I spoke about earlier is being done in a number of apps where you can put in how you feel about a particular place and map it. The most interesting one is what's coming to your smartphone, which will enable you to do all the things I told you about with any additional equipment, which also has a phone, a GPS, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, you name it. We're all becoming individual environmental monitors with the ability to broadcast highly influential information worldwide. And it's all about money at the end of the day. The technology is an enabler, but the value proposition when you're taking real estate is quite strong. So I think we're on a bit of a revolution when it comes to indoor environmental quality, simply by the ability to know what's happening and the knock-on effect that that might have in the real estate industry. So when I talk to clients, I say, don't assume that compliance is enough. Don't assume that certification is enough. Because the way we think about sustainability is about to fundamentally change, and it's changing already. If you think about it, sustainability is now conferred by experts who may never be in that building at a point in time, typically at the design stage. Those experts may never be in the country that that building is in, and we call that sustainability. New tools are coming which allow us to understand data points which are much more important from a financial point of view. They will be provided by ordinary individuals in real time to everybody. So the fundamental question I have when I talk to somebody about their sustainability strategy is, would you have the same strategy if everybody knew everything about the performance of your building? And I have yet to meet somebody who says yes. Thank you.